Hey, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. It's a Saturday morning. In today's class, we're going to be talking about our most popular shrubs and how to grow them. So we haven't done this class before, but there's a lot of things to know about some of these shrubs that we never have a chance to tell people. So this is our class to do that. Now, it just happens we just passed Father's Day, and the plants that are real popular between Mother's Day and Father's Day are the hydrangeas because they're in full bloom at this time. Hydrangeas are native throughout the world. I don't know if there's any in Africa, but they come from around the world. And there's different kinds of hydrangeas. And a lot of new ones been introduced lately. So these are, these are the hydrangeas I put on display here. This is one of the newer ones with the real pretty flower. So the thing to know about hydrangeas is they do tend to lose their leaves in the winter. I mean, we've had some winters in the last 10 years where it wasn't cold enough. They held on to the leaves, but the leaves in the wintertime that they hold on to are pretty ugly. They can grow in sun or shade. Most people grow them in shade. It is one of the better plants we have that bloom in shade. It'll bloom in sun too. If you grow them in sun, you've got to water them about twice as much because the flowers and the leaves are so big, they lose a lot of water quickly. So make sure. And then also the problem we have is where you set them up. So when I was at my last house I lived at, my neighbor had his on the southeast side of his house, so it got a good half day of sun every day, and they were fine. I put mine on the north, I think it's north, slightly east of north side of my house, and what was going, and we had trouble, or we had some burning issues because until May every year they were in total shade. So they started their new growth in April in the shade. They grow real fast. And then in late May, the sun would hit them because the sun was getting higher in the sky and it would burn the leaves. Whereas my neighbors who was on the southeast side of his house, they saw the same exposure every day. They didn't burn. So we know they can go both ways, but you can't suddenly change them. So most of our growers grow hydrangeas in light shade so that if we put them in sun for any length of time, they tend to burn. This is a burn on the leaves on this particular one. So that's sunburn. It happens in the middle of the leaf. If you get burn on the edges, that's dryness. But the center of the leaf is a lot hotter than the edges are, so that's where you get heat burn when you sun expose it to the sun. Now, most of the traditional hydrangeas and the original ones are bloom on growth that comes off of last season's growth. So in other words, you can't, if you cut them back too short after they bloom, you don't get any flowers. So in the wintertime, if you cut them, say, more than halfway down, hydrangeas can grow up to about 5 feet, the ones that we're carrying, Hydrangea macrophylla. But if you cut them down to about a foot, you've cut off all the blooming wood for the spring, and they won't bloom in the spring. Now, when they grow in the spring, they'll grow, and then in the summer and fall, they'll grow branches off of that then can bloom. So you miss your spring bloom, which is the best bloom of the year. So they usually bloom twice because we have such a long year. In the last 20 years, they've developed hydrangeas that bloom on new growth. And this is one of them. They call it game changer, but there's been many hydrangeas before this one that can bloom on new growth, which means you can cut them as low as you want in the wintertime. Whatever grows in spring blooms, whatever grows off of that will bloom, and they can bloom up to, the literature says 5 times a year. We've not seen that much bloom. Maybe if you're down in Miami or in Mexico, they might be able to bloom 5 times in 1 year, but we've seen like 3 times on some of those that can repeat. So not quite as good as roses. Roses can usually bloom about 6 times on each branch per year. The hydrangeas maybe 3, maybe 4 times on the same branch per year. Now this is the traditional mop head, where all the little flowers in the cluster will bloom. This is a lace cap, and so is this, where the center flowers don't have any petals. They still have the flower parts, but they don't have any petals. This, the outside flowers do that. So that's lace cap, and these are, quote, mop heads, where the entire bloom has color, or petals at least. So generally, if you see a hydrangea in the winter time when there's no leaves on it, you'll have stems coming up. So this is what a stem that they grew last summer and fall off of the older stems. And you will see, so wherever there's leaves on this plant, there'll be little buds just above where the leaf was attached. So if you see a hydrangea in the wintertime, it kind of looks like this, with big buds at the top of the stem, small buds on the bottom of the stem. The leaves that get the most sunlight have the most energy. So the ones near the top have the bigger buds, and all these bigger buds will grow a branch with the flower on the end of it. So if you cut it too short in the winter, and you cut it below the last set of big buds, then you're not going to have any flowers. Now what a lot of people do is, right at the beginning of fall, they'll cut this thing down to here, so that the top leaves of your plant are now down here, so they'll develop the flower buds down here instead of up here, because you don't have that anymore. So if you cut them short at the beginning of fall, then they'll develop the flower buds where you have them. You'll have a shorter plant every year that still blooms. So that's one of the tricky things about hydrangeas. If you cut them too short before spring, you miss the spring bloom, unless you have one of the newer hydrangeas that blooms on new growth. The first set of hydrangeas that became popular that bloomed on new wood were called the endless summer ones. We don't carry those too much. They were real subject to mildew, powdery mildew on the foliage. So that's one of the disadvantages we had with that one. So these still can get mildew. We do usually spray them like we do our roses when they get it. If they're in an open area or in a path with good breezes, they don't tend to get mildew. They're not as susceptible as roses, but if it's a real quiet spot, they can still pick it up. Okay, so that's hydrangeas. There is an American relative that we carry. These are native all around the world too. This is called Philadelphus. So those were hydrangea. And this is Philadelphus. This is Philadelphus Fallbrook. Just finished its bloom. If this was an older plant, it would have many more branches and it'd still be blooming, but they usually bloom for another month or so if it's a mature plant. So these do bloom on last year's growth. So those branches, you can see this is new branch for this year. You can clip it. And again, wherever there's leaves on this plant this year, there can be branches that'll grow up just about, looks like they're growing about a foot or less and blooming. So off this branch next year, they'll send up a lot of these shoots that go out as much as 6 foot, 7 foot, and then you can clip them, and then they'll bloom off of those branches for about 3 months next year. Now there's a new reblooming, a new Philadelphus that blooms on new wood that we were selling for about a month here. The suppliers are sold out right now, but that was a Philadelphus called Pearls of Perfume. And it had, this is a single flowered one. That one had more petals. It was a double flowered one. And they said it would bloom from spring through fall, late spring through fall, which is quite nice. And it was much smaller because it spent a lot of time blooming. I'll have to save one for myself next year. We don't have any left. And they are fragrant, yeah, which is nice, yes.
I had a question about the oak leaf hydrangea.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a hydrangea or is it Philadelphus?
That's a hydrangea.
Oh, okay.
So there is an oak leaf hydrangea. There's quite a few hydrangeas we don't carry. We can get them, and they do perform well locally, but they only have the one bloom, and it's later in the year. So we don't bother with them as much. I mean, these hydrangeas tend to bloom better. In case anyone has a question, this is our little mic on this so that people at home can hear too. So, okay. And these, like hydrangeas, sun or shade, less water needed in the shade, just like hydrangeas. And this one came from was native to northern, even though it's called Fallbrook, the plant species is native to Northern California. So. Okay, another big family of plants that we sell would be the hydrangeas, hibiscus. Hibiscus come from pretty much all around the world. These two are the tropical hibiscus that come from Asia, southern Asia, and that's the most common we grow because they're evergreen and they're pretty much ever blooming. Now they perform better in the ground. So what happens to these in pots? They are tropical, so they don't like it cold. The ground stays warmer than the soil in a pot in the wintertime. So the soil in a pot's about the same temperature as the air, and it can get warmer when the sun hits it. But in the middle of winter, if it's 40 degrees, this soil is 40 degrees, and here, the soil on the ground is probably 55. So the ones in the ground remain blooming and evergreen better than the ones in pots. So the ones in containers, especially small containers like this, these went bare this last winter, even though it was a very mild winter. It's like 40 degrees was the coldest it got this last winter, but these still dropped their leaves and stopped blooming. Whereas the ones in the ground in my neighborhood, all blooming, just happy, because their roots stayed warmer. So do remember that with tropical hibiscus, that they can get uglier in pots than they do in the ground. This is a new series of hibiscus. So, forever we've had like the same hibiscus for the last 60 years. The same hibiscus have been sold. We're now trying some of the newer bred ones, like this is called the Hollywood hibiscus series. And they claim they're more colorful. We haven't totally are convinced yet, but they said the reason is because the flower is open for about a day longer. So most hibiscus flowers are open for about a day and a half. And each leaf can make a bloom, has a flower at the base of each leaf. So that's a lot of flowers, but if they only last a day, then on each branch, you're only getting one flower every day on each branch. If you can get the flowers to last longer, then that means you can have 2 flowers on each branch and you're twice as colorful. So we're checking it out to see, but until the plants get bigger, we're not going to really know if that's true or not. They do have some really nice colors, although we can't seem to get the white ones that they've promoted. But some of these have really nice color, yellows, reds, pinks. So we'll stick with this group of hibiscus, see if they are much better in color than the original ones that we've been carrying. So that's the Hollywood hibiscus. They've already had to change some of the names because they use Disco Diva. That's pretty dated now. Hibiscus is a huge family, and there are hibiscus close relatives native to California. I don't have them in stock right now, so I can't really show you the one that's native to the southern southwest deserts. It's called, I can't remember the botanical name now. Well, butyllons. So a butylon native to the desert. The butylons, which are close related to hibiscus, have flowers that hang more. And there is one native to our deserts that can take it extreme drought, extreme heat. It's got gray leaves. I don't have any in stock today. Here's the hibiscus that came from Eastern and Central Africa. This is Hibiscus acetosella. It was brought from Africa to South America maybe 200 years ago to feed the slaves, because in Africa, this is a plant that so hibiscus generally are pretty much edible. They say at the zoos, the gorillas love the flowers, love to eat the flowers. So they're pretty much edible. So you can eat the flowers and tender new growth as salads. There's a lot of hibiscus relatives we sold that they use in the South Pacific for lettuce, because they can't grow lettuce in the hot, tropical islands. So they use the hibiscus leaves of a plant called Abelmotius, which is closely related too. So these grow about 4 or 5 foot tall. They don't live as long as the regular. So a lot of hibiscus family plants are short-lived, like a lot of the native mallows, which the hibiscus are in the mallow family. The native mallows are some of our customers who grow them say, well, once they get to their absolute perfection, then they die from old age. So they're not as pleased with those. They tend to die young. This one, we're getting about a half dozen years out of it, so not bad. Flower is really pretty, but it doesn't show up very well because the whole plant's the same color.
How about the Roselle hibiscus?
We talked about that one. We talked about Roselle last week. So Roselle is a edible where they use the seed pods that are after the blooms as for you can eat them, you can make tea out of them or punch out of them. The whole Roselle plant's edible too. But these are nice and striking, so they're not as cold hardy as these. So if you had them in pots in the wintertime, they may just poop out and die. So watch the better in the ground again. Okay, another plant group that we saw a lot of are azaleas. And these are usually used in the shade. They can handle quite a bit of sun, but because they can bloom in dark shade, that's what we usually save them for, because they're one of the few plants that can bloom in pretty dark shade. So this is the most popular azalea sold. Now azaleas are actually rhododendrons. But we don't really sell plants called rhododendron. Azalea is a family of rhododendrons. It's not quite so coarse, finer textured, and most of the azaleas have a little more solid bloom on them than the rhododendrons did. But rhododendrons are the original genus that this plant's still called. in botanical terms. So this is a azalea called Redbird, and it's got other names they use: red poppy, red ruffles. I think there's one other name that's used for this plant too, but it is one of the probably the nicest azalea we can grow here. It tends to be dense and compact and not get huge. So some azaleas I've grown, grow taller than your head. This one tends to stay below 3 feet, naturally rounded and compact. So we do like it. Plus, it always seems to have some color on it. On a mature plant, there's always a few blooms. It tends to bloom real heavily late fall, early winter, and again heavily, where it's totally solid red, in late winter, early spring, for about a month and a half at a time. So it goes in and out of color a lot during the year. So one of the nicest azaleas. Now azaleas, they do require an acid soil. So they're coming from a climate that's wetter than ours. Most wetter climates have acidic soil. Drier climates have alkaline. So we do usually grow them in our acid mixed potting soil. Now there's a lot of azalea, quote, planting mixes that are sold by other companies. And when I was growing up, my dad would use, at that time, a real famous brand, Bandini acid mix or azalea mix. I can't remember what it's meant. No, might have just been a Bandini. I think it was Azalea Camellia mix. He'd use that, and he'd get great results for about 5 years, and then the plants by the 7th year they'd be dead. And then he would just dig them out, put in new azalea mix, put new plant in there, and another 7, 8 years they'd go, and then you have to replace those again. And that's because the Bandini Azalea Camellia mix was based on ground up bark and peat moss. So what was happening is that as that bark decayed in the ground, it started killing the roots of the azalea. So after about between 5 and 7 years, the root system would be dying on his azaleas, and he'd have to replant them. So in the 1990s, when we made our acid mix, I planted my azaleas in that, and they went for as long as I owned the house, around 20 years, 25 years. They were still fine. So because our acid mix is not based on bark, it's peat moss and volcanic rock. So that kept the roots breathing and kept them from rotting. Okay. And we just put them in pure that because they do like it on the acidic side. Another one for the shade that we like to sell is Camellia. And there's 2 Camellias that we usually sell. Camellia japonica and Camellia sasanqua. The sasanquas supposedly were called sun camellias. They have smaller leaves, which are less likely to heat up. Japonicas can really handle the sun too. So like hydrangeas, if you grew this in the sun all its life, it probably won't burn. But if all the camellia growers grow them in partial shade. So if you suddenly put this in full sun, the leaves will scorch on the top, and then the new growth that it makes will be adapted to the full sun. We found that out because my dad, when he moved from Pasadena to Mission Viejo in the 1960s, there was an abandoned camellia across the street on the west side of a closed factory that he dug up and brought with him and put it on the west side of his home in Mission Viejo, and it never showed any burning. because it had grown on the west side of this building all its life, so no problem. So you can adapt them to sun. So what happens, this has been grown in shade all its life. You put in the sun, everything on the top exposed sun will burn, and then the new leaves coming out should be fine after that. Now we usually, these like it slightly acidic, but they're not as picky as azaleas, so we'll often just put them in the ground with mixed with our acid mix or with our top pot. Either one is fine. And camellias usually have about a 4 to 5 month bloom period. The Sasanqua camellias bloom from October to January or February, so they're fall winter. And the japonica is usually winter spring. Some of them have a shorter bloom period, especially when they're younger, but a lot of them a good 5 months of the year. And just in case, camellias are non-toxic. Camellia sinensis is commercial tea, so they take the new leaves off of the tea plants and steep them in the hot water and you get tea. So these plants are not poisonous. Okay. Camellias and azaleas both. So one of the things to note about camellias is they start making their flower buds in summer for next year. So usually and azaleas do too. So camellias and azaleas, they say if you're going to prune them right after they finish blooming so that you're not cutting off the flower buds for next year. And they also tell you don't fertilize them much. You know, you kind of fertilize them just once at the end of their bloom period. Don't feed them too much after that. So don't feed them in the fall or winter. What happens? So what they're going to be doing in the next few months, they're going to be putting all their flower buds right here. And if you feed them in the fall, they'll put on a whole bunch of new growth above all the flower buds that will hide them. And the same with azaleas. If you feed them too much in the fall, because they'll be making their flower buds, well, of course, this one can bloom all year lightly. But what happens is they'll have a whole set of flower buds set right in this area, and then you make them grow in the fall, and you've got to cut away all the foliage to show off the flowers in the spring. I was told that by azalea growers. They said, yeah, they're often having to cut off a lot of foliage to get back to the flower where the flower buds are sitting. Okay, there's one Bougainvillea that we sell that's a true bush. So among Bougainvilleas, they used all the letters they could to spell Bougainvillea. This has got two names that are both used, Torch Glow and Bangkok Red. Bougainvilleas are native to Brazil. They're not native to Asia. There was another type of true bush bougainvillea called Singapore, which was introduced by Monrovia in the 1990s. And apparently another Dutch company, it was Ringstar. Those are true bushes, but they can't take below 45 degrees. They're really tropical, so you have to be careful with those. So we tried, back in the 90s, I planted Singapore bougainvilleas in my front yard. Gorgeous all summer long, stayed low, didn't spread. And then they all perished that winter. I'm going, okay, what happened here? And then we tried the ring stars, which look very similar to those just a few years ago. And even with the mild winters we have right now, none of them made it. They all kind of perished. A few made it through the winter in containers, but most of them died. So very sensitive to cold versus the bougainvilleas we normally carry, which can handle pretty bad frost.
Which ones don't have thorns?
The questions, which ones don't have thorns? These don't. No thorns on the Bangkok Red or Torchglow. No, I don't recall the Singapore series, the Ring Star Singapore series, having any thorns either. But if you have those, you'd have to keep them hanging up in underneath your patio for cold protection, or bring them inside for the winter. So, okay. Ooh, I forgot one of my hibiscus. Okay. This is Hibiscus moscheudos, which is native to southern North America. Southern and eastern North America. So from North Carolina to Tennessee to, I think, to Georgia. So these are perennial hibiscus. All the above parts, ground parts, die in the winter. So you cut them down to stubs, and then in around March, April, they start growing their shoots very quickly. And then they're just starting to make flower buds now. And then these flowers are bigger than these. They usually are about 8 to 10 inches across. So as big as some of the biggest dahlias that we sell. So they get really big. Right now we have on display out there the a red one called Desire, and this is a door and it's a medium pink with the dark eye. So, and they do pick up bronze with more sunlight. The leaves turn a little more bronze. The red one's a little darker. So that's the perennial hibiscus, they call it. Okay, so one of the problems in our trade is nobody sells good gardenias. We pretty much expect gardenias grown by other nurseries, sold by any other nursery, to die in your yard. Because our entire trade grows plants in compost, because the universities have promoted using compost instead of soil to grow plants, and because compost is nutrition and soil is not, well, that's pretty silly. So we have to grow our own gardenias. If you want to make sure that they do well, we have to grow our own. And it turns out we started growing these about 10, 12 years ago. It turns out gardenias are one of the easiest plants to grow as long as they're not in compost. So all we do to grow these, we take a piece of stem about that long, the last 4 inches of this plant, and then we stick it in some of our acid mix and put it in the greenhouse, and they all grow. It's like we get 90% take on cuttings of gardenias. Like a lot of the other plants, we get like 20% take, and we're happy if we get 50% take. Gardenias, we rarely ever lose a cutting on a gardenia. They're like the easiest plant in the world to grow. And then everybody's putting them in compost, and they just turn yellow and rot away after a few years. So we have to grow our own. This is gardenia called Amy. Gardenias are native to Asia, tropical Asia. I believe they're also native probably to Eastern Africa too, because there is a gardenia from Africa. Or they might just call it African, even though it's probably from Asia. So this Amy has flowers between 3 and 5 inches across. We usually grow another one called Vici or Everblooming, and I don't have any right now of that one. That one grows flowers that look the same, but they're 1 to 2 inches across, and that's the more common one. The Amy's can reach about 5 or 6 feet. Here, if you're in Florida, they can actually get to 10 foot tall, but they'll bloom at 2 feet. You don't have to let them grow big. but they have the really big flowers. And this is not full size by any means. You see them on a established plant, they're a good 5 inches, so they look like roses, and they have, of course, better fragrance than roses do. So a neat plant. Yes.
Do they do better if they're grafted or no?
Well, the grafting was done because they were all dying in the compost soils. So they graft into supposedly African gardenia, Gardenia thunbergiana, that's a lot stronger to bad soil conditions than these. So they tried to solve the problem they caused by, it's like medicine. They tell you, you're overweight, take this medicine, instead of just doing the right thing and putting them in right soil. They put them in the wrong soil, and then they have to graft them onto a rootstock that can handle that bad soil better. But they didn't need to do that part. They could have just used better soil. So, 40 years ago, maybe almost 50 years now, the growers used the right soil, and they didn't have to graft them. And after they changed to using compost as soil, then they had to start grafting to keep them from dying immediately. They still die in it because they're surrounded by this compost. They're growing them in ground up bark. And when ground up bark starts to decay real badly after a few years, it looks like black slime, and that just kills the roots. But even when it's fresh ground up bark, they still hate it. So they had to graft into something that can handle that stuff. But without ground up bark, and they're perfect plants. You don't have to get the grafted ones. The original potting soil was pure sand. Nothing rots in pure sand. It just rots when you try to use them in ground up dead trees. So, okay. So that's the gardenias. This is about 5 months after we took the cuttings. I think we did these late last fall. So, okay. A plant that really sells well when they're in bloom would be the New Zealand tea trees. This one's done blooming, or just about done blooming. It's a Leptospermum scoparium, New Zealand tea tree. These are just kind of, the foliage isn't exceptional, but you can make hedges out of them. Usually in nature, they grow kind of teardrop when they're young. But if you train them up, you can eventually make them to a tree form. They can get big enough. They have a woody enough stem, you can make them a tree form to come out and sprawl. But in my yard, I just kept them as a teardrop shaped bush. And they can get denser over the years. And this one's called Ruby Glow. And it can be totally red when it blooms. I mean, pretty much totally red for between 3 and 6 months. I remember when I first grew this, it started blooming in late fall and it didn't finish till summer. I'm going, my God, this thing is really colorful. The white ones, there's white and pink. Those don't seem to have quite as long a bloom as the Ruby Glows. Ruby Glows are a favorite. The white one is very bright, though. When it blooms, it is snow white. So it is nice, if you had red and white next to each other, they would show off each other real well. And they're quite drought tolerant. They handle the soils, the compost soils don't seem to bother them, but they're not drought tolerant until they're, when they're, especially when they're in full bloom, when they sell the fastest, people take them home, plant them, don't water them for a few days, and they just dry up to a crisp. And you can't tell because you can't see the leaves wilting on this thing. So it doesn't, so suddenly it's brown after a month in the ground, and they bring it back in, and I look at it and go, okay, you didn't water that the first week you planted it. So you got to water them daily initially, and once they're rooted, they're very drought tolerant. The other thing to know about leptospermums is they don't grow from bare wood. So most of the plants we're talking about, you can cut camellias and hibiscus to about an inch above the dirt, and they'll regrow. This thing, if you cut it beyond the last leaf on the plant, it's dead. It doesn't regrow from bare wood. So be careful with that. There's a number of plants, the Protea family, which includes leucospermums, leucodendrons. You can't cut them below the last leaf on the plant. Pine trees, same way. If you cut a pine tree below the last green leaf, the growth buds below that are not active anymore. They can't grow back. Okay, another popular family of plants would be the Tecomas. Interesting, they're native from southern central, well, actually western southern United States, all the way down to Argentina and South Africa. So apparently South Africa, well, we know South Africa was connected to South America a long time ago. So the Tecomas include, this is Tecoma stans, native to northern Mexico and Texas. And this is a hybrid of Tecoma capensis from South Africa. They hybridized it with several things. Well, this might be more, well, it's more American than it is African. There's not much left. And the real common one that you see a lot is Tecoma capensis, just the dark orange flowering one that blooms. So that one blooms fall, winter, actually winter, spring. And then these bloom close to year round. And they do bloom year round, especially if they're in pots. And this last winter, even in pots, it didn't get too cold for them. They bloomed all the way through winter. Whereas last year, winter, they dropped their leaves in containers. It got a little colder. But this winter, they just kept blooming. As bushes, because they're somewhat viney, but as bushes, this Tecoma here is usually used as about a 5-foot hedge or screen, and they can bloom all year. They can grow higher. In their native area, especially down in Texas, they never get higher than 5 feet because they freeze to the dirt every winter and then come back up and bloom again. Here, because we don't freeze, you can actually get these above 10 feet, 15, even 12 foot, make little trees out of them. This was bred by University of Arizona, so they call it Sparky, which is the University of Arizona's mascot. Arizona colors, so. Okay, we like this one, the tibouchina. And we have to grow these ourselves too because they're another plant that doesn't like compost in the soil. So whenever we get these from other growers, all the leaves have brown edges really badly. So to avoid that, we have to grow these in our own soil without the compost. And you can see all the flower buds on this. This thing's about to explode. Some tibouchina, native to South America, especially Brazil. They're actually fairly drought tolerant. They're used a lot in Arizona. See them on lava flows growing in Hawaii. So tibouchina. We have another variety I didn't bring in because they're not in bloom right out the door here called so this is Tibouchina erviliana. And the one we have outside is a selection called Athens, which is about half the size. So this one you can make it into a little tree. You can make it above 10 feet by a little bit. The Athens won't get much above shoulder height. Smaller leaves, smaller flowers, denser growth. It's quite nice too, and they're not showing buds quite yet. But both of these can bloom most of the year. They do dry out very easily in containers. You have to watch out, and they're better in the ground. Try to remember the common name for tibouchina. Well, princess flower. Okay, another real common plant, almost so common we hate to sell them, are Lantana. But they have their value. So 40 years ago, we didn't sell as many Lantanas because they would freeze to death in the winter. Especially the lavender one, which is real common as a ground cover, doesn't freeze. But the other colors can freeze. If we get a bad frost, they can die. So I remember when I was a kid in LA, it was not a problem. LA is a little warmer there, and my grandmother had lantana in her yard. But when we moved to Mission Viejo in the 60s, they would plant these on the slopes, and they wouldn't make it through the winter. They'd have to replant them. I think they were supposed to plant the one called New Gold, which is a hybrid between the lavender and the yellow ones to make it more winter hardy, but they didn't do that. They found a different yellow one, and they all just died in the cold. Last 20 years now, we really haven't had bad frost, so now they become more reliable landscape shrubs. Most of them grow about 2 foot by about 4 or 5 foot wide. The lavender ones can be kept lower and spread far. They're maybe 6 foot wide. And there is a white version of the lavender ones also. Okay, so Lantana. Some California natives. This is your ceanothus. And if you go to other nurseries, they'll tell you, oh, don't water in the summertime. Be very careful. They rot real easily in compost. And they're all grown in compost. So if you buy them from another nursery, they don't even have these on display this time of year because they're all rotting away on them. So the thing about summer, the reason why they say don't water them in summer is because in summer the soil is warmer, and if you use compost as the soil in warmer conditions, it rots faster. And especially if you keep it wet, it rots faster, and which then consumes all the oxygen the roots need to stay healthy, and it rots them. Root rot is caused by poor oxygen levels, not by water. It's caused by lack of oxygen in the water. But if you don't have any compost in it, you can't rot them. So when we started growing ceanothus about 6-7 years ago, we found they don't rot, but everything we get from our growers will rot in the summertime. But everything we grow doesn't rot. So we grow all our own ceanothus now. This is Diamond Heights with the variegated leaves. And the other one is the most popular landscape one called Yankee Point. We've grown quite a few others. This is all we have at the moment. They all bloom in spring. This one, the flowers don't show up very well because they're a light blue, just like this one. This one with the dark green foliage, the light blue shows up better. Yankee Point will actually grow 3 foot high and sprawl out 10 foot across. So it covers a lot of hillside if you want to do that with it. Diamond Heights, much smaller, maybe 12 to 18 inches high and 4 or 5 feet wide. So a nice foreground plant in the garden. discolor all year, so it's bright. You can use it in front of a darker leaf thing. It shows up real nicely. And they're fast. They are fast growing. So even though it's a native, as long as you water it, I mean, Yankee points in 1 year are easily 5 foot across. They really haul. They have a reputation as being short-lived. I don't know, I've never grown them for very long, so I don't know how true that is. They said that Caltrans does not plant them along highways anymore because they'd have to replace them within 10 years. That might be because they're all grown in compost. It's possible. We're not exactly sure yet what the reasoning is. But I did email and contact University of California at Berkeley professor Matteo Gabarlito, who wrote a paper on why native plantings along highways fail, and he says because they come from the growers grown in compost. He says the plants we're getting from the growers already have root rot, and that's why the native plants are failing along the highways. So they've been using plants more tolerant to compost, but all they have to do is stop using compost as soil, and the native plants should do a lot better. Few nurseries know this. I mean, Las Politas in Northern California, well, they're by the Bay Area. Las Politas says, why don't nurseries grow plants in real dirt? So they have the same notion that we do, is that the compost is not really good for the plants. So, and they grow natives. So they're one other source of natives that I actually trust. I don't trust the other sources of natives in Southern California at all. 40 years ago, Cuphea was much more popular than it is now. Probably just because the flowers are small. So Cuphea, they bloom year round, look the same year round, so they're nice that way. So they're always blooming, but the flowers are on the small side, so you don't notice them from distance. They can handle real wet conditions if they're in the right soil. I used to plant mine. We know that these are from the cloud mountains of Mexico, some of those plateaus that are always raining on them, so they can take it wet. They said they can also take it fairly dry. I haven't tried that, but when I was younger, I planted one of these in the drainage area of my front yard, so it was underwater most of the time, and it did just fine. So they can take it wet if they're not in the wrong soil. This grower here uses the worst. Well, there's two growers that use 100% compost. We just don't like their soil at all. So, but they sell really neat plants. We're not sure if to call this one a shrub or a perennial, but that's Gaura. And it's one of our workhorse small shrubs now. The original Gauras, and they're native to Texas and Louisiana, so they can handle extremes, were tall plants that, and not real dense, that bloomed blush white pink flowers. This one is Gaura Beliza, deep pink. And the foliage on it is evergreen and stays around a foot, just maybe a little over a foot. So it's just a mounded shrub on the ground. And from April through November, it spikes up and blooms about 18 inches or so, maybe 20 max. So it's a good front border plant, stays nice and low. And And what we do with it, it makes so much flowers and flower stems that about 3 times a year, we'll just shear off all the old stems because they make seeds, seed pods. They spend energy making seed pods. So usually, first part of summer, I'll just shear off all the old flowers and seed pods. And then they're just continuing to bloom all summer. And then the first day of fall, I'll come back and shear them off again to get rid of those. And then the first day of winter, shear them off for the final time because they don't bloom in winter, and that'll keep them clean until spring. So I would just shear off the tops 3 times a year. I mean, you can cut off the spent blooms and save the nice ones, but it's a lot of work because they make a lot of flower stalks. So you'd have to kind of poke through them, cut off the dead ones and save. But we found it much easier just to shear off the entire top of that to clean it up, and they would start blooming immediately again. But a good plant. In fact, one of the first ones we've ever grew, which were a taller variety called Siskiyou Pink, we had them in our parking lot, and after a year we thought, boy, we should divide that thing. It looks like it can be divided and make new plants. We dug one out of the ground, and even though nothing above ground looks very substantial, the roots on that plant were as thick as my wrist. We're going, okay, we can't divide this thing. And that's what makes them so strong. They develop huge underground roots. We're just surprised that the underground portion of the plant was so massive when the stems weren't any thicker than, they were thinner than pencils. But we couldn't divide that thing. Just too woody to divide. But so very sturdy plant. In fact, we turned off the water for 6 months on it to see if anything would happen. Nothing happened. So they're, once they're established like that, they're quite drought resistant. Plus they're long lived, so they're not true perennials because we had the same plant in our yard for like over 12 years, I think. Yes.
Slope stabilization.
Probably so. They do reseed lightly, so you get new ones that come up. Interestingly, a lot of the ones that I've grown that came up from seed bloom this same color. Even though their natural color is white with the pink blush, a lot of the seedlings that came up from those blush ones came up dark pink. We were just amazed. Okay, this one is Jacobinia, also known as Justicia. They found out that Justinias and Jacobinias are close related, so they just put them all together. Carnea, and this is Brazilian plume, so native to Brazil. They can handle frost decently, so we don't usually have any problems with them in the winter. They can bloom in fairly dark shade, so we use them alongside Azaleas and Camellias. It'll handle sun, but just like other plants in the sun, it needs a lot more water in the sun. So mostly shade. They can bloom most of the year, so quite nice that way too. About 3 to 5 foot in height, say 4 foot is about average. So we do like them. I can't find these from my growers. They just kind of don't grow. Now they are brittle, so you don't want to put them too close to a walkway. If you go by one too quickly, you break off some branches. So they're on the brittle side, but quite spectacular bloomers. So another good plant. We don't see enough of it. I think that's all the plants I brought. Any questions on anything? Yes.
Oh, I was going to ask on that one, this last one, Jacob. Yeah. Does it handle high water, like wet soils?
They like it wet. They're from Brazil.
Okay.
They can take it really wet. They not too bad with drought. I mean, we've had some plants drought really badly and they'd be totally wilted, but didn't seem to cause too much trouble. So they're probably slightly drought resistant when they're well established. So yes.
Your Tecoma, and then you really talk about too much. It's a small shrub. I think that's how you say it.
Antigonon?
Antigonon.
I don't know enough about them. Isn't that a vine?
I thought it was a small bush. I'm sorry.
I,
Or is
I
that
don't
the
know that
caledo-
one. And Tigonon leptotus is a vine. I don't know the other Antigonons.
Gotcha. Well, the Tecoma, if you just deadhead the dead flowers, then it'll just keep reblooming. And
That's a good point. I forgot to mention. Yeah, these are famous for making seed pods that'll stunt the growth of the next flowers. So after they've totally finished blooming, look for these shoelace thick seed pods and hang down and clip them, and then they'll get to their next bloom quicker. Thank you. And another interesting point is we found out that if you have only one hibiscus plant or genetically one hibiscus plant in your garden, they don't seem to reseed much. But if you start putting a lot of different hibiscus around together, they start making seed pods too. You got to take them off to get rid of them so they don't slow down the growth of the new flowers. So this Hollywood series seems to be very prolific reproducers. And you put them there, any other hibiscus makes the other ones start making seed pods also. So
are the ceanothus found in the mountains as well, probably in sand?
ceanothus are native to many, many locations. There's certain ones that are better near the coast, certain ones better inland. I don't know enough about all the other varieties. We know that Diamond Heights was discovered in San Francisco.
When you tell the growers about the compost, why don't they change it for the plants that are affected by the compost?
Because the University of California still promotes compost as soil, so they won't listen to me just because I'm not University of California. So they just don't get it. I mean, the only reason I'm real confident about not using compost is because back in the 50s, when I was a kid, my dad planted everything in sandy dirt. And we never had heard the term overwatering or root rot. There's no such thing back in the 50s and 60s about root rot. The main complaint our customers had was root bound. You pick up the plant, pull it out of the pot, the roots go around and around and around, but real healthy looking roots, they just keep on going around. Nowadays, you pull a plant out of a pot, you don't see many roots, or you don't see anything healthy. They're all brown, they're not real healthy looking. That's from the compost. But so far, I haven't been able to convince a single nursery, in California, to change. I have heard from people back east that have seen our classes on video. And this one grower who was growing citrus in Texas said, I pretty much saved his nursery because he was trying to grow them in compost and was failing terribly. And now he's growing them in a more reasonable soil like what we do. And he's very happy with the results. So that's one nursery we know of that has switched. But I've talked to dozens of nurseries just gave up because they all learned from the universities. The latest round of growers were taught by the universities. And the universities teach that you can't grow plants in real dirt. I was told face to face by a professor at college, you can't grow plants in real dirt. Because there's no nutritional value. It's like, what planet? I was thinking to myself, nowadays I would tell them to his face, what planet are you from? But in those days, I was more respectful. I'm not respectful to them anymore because they just don't know anything. Apparently, they have to follow the research, and the research was never meant to ask the question, is compost better than dirt permanently? Because compost, you can grow a plant faster in compost for 3 months. It'll grow faster in compost than it does in dirt just because it's airier. But the same research article we read says after 5 months, it starts becoming toxic. In 8 months, it's a toxic medium. And in theory, the professors who preach this are hoping that it decomposes to inert material that's no longer toxic to the plants. We know it stays toxic for a long time. I mean, when I've grown citrus without removing the compost, it doesn't kill them, but it stunts them for 10 years. They're stunted until that. So after 10 years, that compost seems to have finished its significant decomposition. The plant can finally get going. But we do remember from, at my last house, I planted the same plants from 5 different growers. One of the growers, all their plants died 3 years in the ground. Another, all their plants died 5 years in the ground. Another plant was like 8 or 9 years. But from 2 growers, the same plants never died because they weren't growing them in the same compost. One grower just used peat moss and perlite, and their plants never died because that's not compost. One grower that plants didn't die, they used redwood sawdust, which decomposes really slowly, and their plants never died. So that's the, so, but everyone else was using shaved bark or bark, fir bark. And those plants would just, and one of the growers used redwood grind, which is redwood sawdust that's ground to a far smaller size, so it decomposes fast. The smaller the particle you make, the faster it can decompose because the surface area is greater. Like a piece of wood doesn't decompose very fast because it's only got that surface. You chop it into 1 million parts, suddenly it decomposes in 3 months because it's got so much more surface area. In fact, if you chop it into fine sawdust and make a big pile, it'll catch on fire. It's decomposing so fast. So, but a solid tree falling on the ground may take centuries to decompose. It's just strange that they think that sawdust is a natural material. So,
Yeah.
that's an off-track subject, but
Since I started listening to you now whenever I get a plant, I completely wash everything out of it. And I notice if you hold it upside down, you can spread the root ball out. But I'm surprised because some of it looks like good dirt, and then you get right up in the heart there's like a big chunk of wood or slivers in there. And I've yet to find any that are good soil. And
right. It's just not in the trade anymore. Now we used to have, what was interesting, we used to have one grower who apparently would mix it with the tractor. So sometimes the root ball would be kind of muddy on one side and then the compost on the other. The roots would all be in the muddy side. They hated the compost. When you give them a choice, they'll head for even when it looks like mud, it's fine. It's better than being in the compost. So.
The Camellias scope, that's a shrub, right? Not the Antigon. Camellias scope. It's a.
Well, you're talking about kaleidoscope abelia.
Yeah.
That's not we don't consider it a blooming shrub. It's very colorful.
That's a small shrub.
Yeah, that's a nice plant. We carry it, but it's not, even though it blooms, it's not one of our quote blooming shrubs.
Stuff, but yeah.
Yes.
I have a question. 25 years ago, I started with 5 raised bed.
Right. Just start over.
25 years ago, I started with 5 raised bed garden for my vegetables. I got topsoil, and for about 5 years, things were fine. And then I had some problem, so I started adding more compost. And I'm having more trouble. Now I'm at a point where I've been adding so much compost, I'm having more problems. And then I've seen a couple of your videos about sandy soil. I was wondering if I add sand to my garden now, would that help, or do I need something else?
It'll help, but it's better just to get rid of the soil you have and just put in sand or sandy soil.
I mean, I have so much, they're all 5 by 5.
Right.
And they're about 2 feet. That's a lot of soil to get rid of.
Yeah.
So that's my dilemma. Is there any other thing I can do?
Well, I don't know. I spent, because I did the same thing. I brought in 17 truckloads of a compost soil mix to fill my raised beds. This was before I knew about dirt back in the early 90s. And I thought the soil company knew what they were doing. So I asked them, what do I fill all these raised beds with? And they said, our topsoil C, which is 60% real dirt and 40% compost. So I planted my plants in that. They did okay initially, and then everything started rotting and falling over. We're going, okay, what am I doing wrong? And we just started replacing it. After we figured it out, it took me 3 years to figure it out, what was going on. I talked to a soil scientist. He said, yeah, there's no organic matter in the ground. I just started replacing it bit by bit, as much as, well, I'm lucky because I have a 4 cubic yard trash bin that I can fill up with a half yard of dirt at it every week. So I did that for 10 years. Because I had 170 cubic yards. And I didn't do it every week, but after 10 years, I got rid of all of that and put in sandy loam. And the difference was so stark that I wasn't about to try to fix that soil that the soil company gave me, because it was 40%, and there's no way you can get, in nature, it's 1% or a little bit less than 1%. And the only way I can get it less than 1% was to throw it away. I mean, there's nothing you do. If it's 40% when you get it, you'd have to increase the volume by 40 times to get it down to where it should be. So I just didn't even bother. I just started throwing it away a little bit at a time. So
if I remove most of it, I've noticed that I live in Hacienda Heights, which we have a lot of clay in our soil. Seemed like the soil, that clay soil, has pushed up further than where I started with when I started with hardly any clay. So if I replace, let's say, one at a time, what should I replace the soil? What kind of soil should I replace it with? And where would I get it?
Well, if you raise it up 2 foot, clay is fine for that. Once you raise clay that high off the ground, it drains a lot better. But just sandy dirt. Some people like to use decomposed granite. So there are a lot of farms in Fallbrook and Vista that are on pure decomposed granite. It's a fine soil to grow plants in. The one advantage I should say about decomposed granite is there's usually no weed seed in it. Whereas occasionally when you get sandy loam, which is what a farmer would want, folks, if you're not, this is it. We change subjects here, so you're free to leave if you like. But the sandy loam is just mostly sand, just a hint of clay in it. So sandy loam is what farmers would want to have on a farm, and that's cheaper than sand. If you go to a building supply, sandy loam is cheap, decomposed granite's cheap. Sand is a little more expensive, but sand works too. I mean, when we started doing our soil testing 35 years ago, the best plants were in pots of sand. Absolutely spotless plants. As long as you fertilize them, spotless plants.
What kind of fertilizer?
Organic. I mean, a lot of fertilizers work. Organics are best in the long run, but just leave them on top of the ground. So all organic stuff in nature is on top of the ground. So in nature, the soil is below the surface. It's 99.1% mineral. The 0.9% that's organic are just the dead roots that are from the plants. But there's 5 inches of dead leaves on average in nature on top of the ground, and that's the nutrition layer. And that's where fungus and bacteria, earthworms, pill bugs, all those guys live there. The plant's roots live down here. If you try to make the plants grow in the compost, they get messed up by the bacteria and the fungus. It just eats those roots alive. So that's the problem with using compost as a soil, is that's not, that's a different ecosystem, part of the ecosystem. That's where the fungi and bacteria live. And the roots live down here in essentially pure sand, silt, and clay. It's almost, it's 99% mineral is what the soil is. So, yes.
What do you think about using like logs, logs, breaking down slowly in like a What do you think about using large log pieces in like a raised bed as the base, so that you don't have to get as much soil, but they fill up the space and slowly rot over time?
Soil's pretty cheap, but yeah, logs don't break down very fast. It's like having a big root in the ground. It breaks down fairly slowly since it's intact. But still, you eventually might want to get rid of it, because after about 5 years, it'll start breaking to smaller pieces, which can cause trouble. So I wouldn't do it.
So the soil that you're removing, can you use that as a mulch? The old soil that your plants.
Well, yeah, if it's got the organic material in it, too much organic material, if you spread it over the surface of the ground, less than a few inches deep, there's no problem, because there's a lot of organic matter on the surface of the ground anyway.
3 or 4 inches.
Right. I don't know if I'd go much over 3,
3 inches.
because the air can still get through that really easily.
Oh, that's right.
So to break down the organic matter properly, it needs good air. So you can, in theory, spread it thinly over the entire. I threw mine away because I had so much. But if you throw it over a lawn, it's fine. The grass will love that on top of it. So
You smooth out your lawn.
yeah, especially if it's mixed with dirt. Grass loves having new, fresh dirt put on top of it. It makes it look really good. Yes,
I don't think I'm pronouncing it right. Matillaja poppy?
Matillaha poppy.
I've had trouble. Thanks. I've had trouble growing. Is
Well,
it just that I'm not watering it enough?
No, it's because they're grown in compost.
I think that's just it.
Yeah, whenever we grow Matillaha poppies, but I couldn't get the starters this year. There's a company in Oregon that gets them started from seed. So they can be done by root cuttings and from seed, but to get the seed started, you got to burn the seed. So we don't do that here, although I've got a Matillaha poppy in my ground now at my home that's really healthy. So I might start digging up the roots of it and grow more plants.
I mean, it's taken over my entire hillside. Started crawling into the neighbor's yard. I mean,
That's what I
I
see.
can't see
and I'm
my
like, what am I
sidewalk.
doing?
Yeah, so on Matillahas, they often start from sections of the root. I used to do that when I had a big one at my last house. I would dig up around it, just stick the roots in a pot with our top pot, and they would all grow and never lose one. But all the growers try to grow them in compost, and it's rotting out more than half of them. Once they get out of there, they're fine. Once they make their underground runners, then they're unkillable. But all the literature says if you want to have one Matillaha poppy, buy 2, because half of them die. Well, it's just because of the soil the growers grow them in. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.